Cinematic percussions aren't just about the big drum sound. They're about impact, texture, and authenticity. In this video, I would like to share with you a few drum design techniques that I've been experimenting and exploring in these years, either as a trader music composer as in my work with silence and other sounds. Hopefully this will inspire you to create your own cinematic drums as well, so stay with me. You're probably familiar with contact microphones, which are basically devices that detect the sound when it travels through a solid mean, for example, a surface. This is very basically the difference with conventional quote-unquote microphones like this one, which is a condenser microphone, where a capsule detects the air pressure variation, so the propagation of sound through air. And this disturbance, so to speak, is converted to an electrical signal, which subsequently is converted into sounds that we hear in our computer, in our DAWs, etc. So let's say that the contact microphone feels the sounds when it's still traveling through a solid mean. And sound-wise, in terms of sound peculiarities, it's, let's say, a magnified version of a closed mic technique. When you have a contact microphone applied to a surface, if it's a good microphone and has a good preamp, you can perceive all the small tiny detail on what is happening on that surface. And in the examples that I showed you before of me performing on several objects, there is this little box here that I purchased a few months ago, which is the Leaf Audio Microphonic Sandbox. Of course, I purchased it, all the things that I'm going to show here, also third-party software is stuff that I purchased for my own work. It's not a sponsored content, nothing of that stuff. It's just instruments and tools that I purchased for my own work with sound design. And basically, this box is built this way. You have all these springs and surfaces and bars. And within the box, there is a contact microphone that detects all the movements, all the things that happen on the surface, on the external surface of this box. And so, if I show you the sound of, without the processing chain that I've applied, so let's turn off this gate and this whole chain, what you hear is something like this. So, not a particularly interesting sound. Let's apply a little bit of gate to, just extrapolate the louder sounds, because it's extremely sensitive. So, even the tiniest movements, even the movements that you hear when you lift the hand from the surface can be detected, and this can be not very musical. But if I turn on this audio chain that I'm going to show you, just hear what happens. Okay, maybe you won't see it here, so I'll try to do it here. So let's see how I obtain this sound by processing the incoming sound from the sound box. Well, the first and most important device that I have here is this granular delay, which is M granular by Melda Production. It's possibly the most versatile grain delay that I have, and at least the ones that I know. And the most crucial setting to recreate this, percussive, this kind of orchestral percussive sound, it's the grain size, because with the M granular, I can set the grain size to extremely small values. You see here I have 2 milliseconds. I can set the copies, so to speak, which is the number of grain, and other interesting parameters like the width, pitch, the modulation rate of these parameters. And if I go, let's say, under the hood here, you can also assign frequency bands to the grains and let them move. So I just want to show you what happens if I change, for example, just to show you how sensitive this technique can be to very small, tiny peculiarities of the sounds. If I set the grain size to, in higher values, so let's say 30 milliseconds, here you start to hear the separations between all the grains, all the grain repetitions. But if I have them very tight, so yeah, let's try with a little bit less than 2 seconds, the 2 milliseconds. Let's try 1.5. You have these tight sounds, but at the same time it feels like, there are multiple drums that are playing simultaneously, okay? And if we can play around also with pitch as well, so if we raise it a little bit, we have a different timbre, different tone. So this is frankly something that happened by accident, by experimenting with this, with the sound box and with the processing chain, and I came up with this sound that is quite convincing. I mean, if you probably hear a single individual sound, there is something that is artificial, but in my opinion, in the context of a full performance, well, let's set back this to 2 milliseconds. It sounds very convincing, very interesting. It lays a little bit between something that you are familiar with, the sound of cinematic percussion, but also something else, right? Which is something that I always enjoy to do. Set the listener on the line between something that is familiar and something that is not. So let's hear again. Yeah, the interesting thing is that you do not just process this ticking sound of me tapping on this surface, but also the resonances that come from these springs, because, well, let me turn off everything for a second. And you can hear the sounds of the spring that vibrates. Okay. And when this is processed, it creates this really interesting effect. So generally, experimenting with contact microphone and with a creative chain like this one can give some very interesting and unique kind of percussion sounds. Again, in the chain I have also an instance of Airbase by Waves, which is a very popular kind of plugin, which emphasizes more, boosts more the low frequencies, of course. And then I have an instance of Neutron, isotope Neutron, where I have a little bit of boost on the high end, well, possibly more than a little bit. And then I have a multiband exciter to sculpt the sound. And eventually I have this convolution reverb, which is an Ableton Live reverb to add a little bit of ambience. And finally, a saturator, which is Saturation Now by Softtube. I think I downloaded this when it was free for a while. I'm not sure if they still have it free right now, but it's a one-trick pony that always adds a lot of grit, a lot of presence to the sound. And if you're wondering, in my previous video where I was drumming on that kind of metallic bucket, circular bucket, I used a contact microphone, which is this one. This is a very popular thing among sound designers. It's the Barkusberry, I think it's called the sound wave. I always called it the Barcusberry, so I don't remember exactly the name, which is originally thought as a contact microphone for pianos. You put it somewhere close to the soundboard or to the strings to, give more presence to the sound. But this is really a sound design, classic kind of microphone, because wherever you stick it to it, you're always able to, grab some very tiny details of the sound that, in my experience, I've never managed to grab with other contact microphones. This is a little bit pricey, but you are not paying the actual microphone. This is the thing that actually detects the sounds. You are paying for this other thing, which is the electric circuitry that elaborates the sound that comes from the probe, so to speak. And this is a common issue with contact microphones, because theoretically you can build even one, by yourself for nothing, basically. There are a few tutorials on YouTube by other people that did that. If you don't find it, I can do one if you want me to do it. But the problem is that, without going too much in detail with electronics, is that without a dedicated circuitry, due to a problem of impedance between the microphone and for example, your sound card where you connect the microphone to, this impedance mismatch creates basically a high pass effect. So you are going to lose a lot of the low content of the incoming signal, if I'm not wrong, below the 250 hertz. So you have a very tiny, very harsh kind of sound. And I've tried a lot of contact microphones. I also tried, stuff that they use to amplify violins, but, with this one, due to this circuitry, is, I always had great results. And again, I purchased this thing. So yeah, let's say that I think that what I showed you, with contact microphone falls under the umbrella of physical modeling, because you have an input that is elaborated either by a true resonator, in the case of the box, and the virtual resonator, which is the chain that I built. So it's a very interesting, so I highly encourage you to experiment with contact microphones and live processing. And I've created a lot of the sounds that you can hear in our latest library, Cartago, Ancient Drums of the Future, which I made in collaboration with Stefano Maccarelli, sound designer of the Ethereum series, Elements. You certainly know him. And many of the sounds that you can hear, especially in this module, which is the Designs Drums Kit, comes from this kind of experiments with the soundbox and with other things that I managed to record by attaching the Barcusberry contact microphone to surfaces, which were then processed. And specifically, this very first sound that comes from the leaf box, which is again this one, you can hear something really similar in Cartago in the percussions category. Have a multi-sampled version of this sound, so 6 round robins and 5 levels of dynamics, but it's plenty other ones of this designed percussive sound that I created with this technique, so we will find plenty in the Designs Drums Kit in Cartago. Speaking of virtual resonators, a device that I believe is criminally underrated is Prism by Native Instruments, which is basically a reactor ensemble that is based on physical modeling. It's both available as a synth that you can play as an effect, and this is where the interesting part comes in, because this is what I'm using. I'm using Prism as an effect on some input sounds. So it's pretty deep, the interface is not exactly let's say friendly, but it's basically a modal filters that attempts to replicate the behavior of let's say acoustic resonators, but you can either go realistic or completely surreal. And you have the modal band control that you basically design the harmonics, the spectral fingerprint, so to speak, of the resonator. Plus other interesting control, for example, the main tune, the basic tune of the whole resonator. And another interesting thing is that you can add an envelope follower of white noise. I mean, you can let's say apply, according with the level of the incoming signal, a burst of white noise, and you can control the attack and the decay of white noise. And we're going to see right now why it's interesting. So let's close it for a second. Let's turn off this chain and let's have a listen to these random found sounds that I had, generic sounds that I recorded. Well, some of them were not recorded by me, but a good friend of mine who is Vincenzo Bellanova, great sound designer. So let's hear a few of these sounds. So, they're pretty, raw, maybe a little bit generic, one-shot sounds, found sounds. And so I thought, well, I want to find a way to process these sounds and turn them into something that, it's more cinematic, has more presence and more identity. And so let's turn on this chain, and now you have to hear the result. This is particularly good for one-shots. So now with this chain of processing, where the main the main element is a prism, is that they turned in something that sounds a little bit like snares. And so what happens is that these sounds go into this resonator, okay, where I have set the tune to 149, and then I add this burst of white noise that is added on the top of these samples. And topping a sound, an impulsive sound with white noise is one of the common techniques to create a kind of snare one-shot sounds in drum machines, in samplers, etc. And they have embedded it in the whole ensemble, which is a great thing, because otherwise you should do it manually. You should grab a white noise sample or from a synth and then layer it with the original sound. And the nice thing is that it follows the original incoming signal. And I can add, for example, the decay. You see, is a little bit longer. You can also add, increase the volume. You can high cut the white noise. You see, I'm decreasing, I'm cutting the high frequencies, and so the sounds is not as bright. But this is, you can even just completely turn off the noise and also decrease a little bit the tuning of the resonator, and you will have something that resembles more to a kick sound. Okay, let's add a little bit of reverb to give a more cinematic feel. Well, I have added this track with all this change, this group where there is another chain of effects, in order to separate things a little bit, because otherwise it would have been a little bit too cluttered. So let's hear now. Yeah, let's add a little bit of decay. Yeah, and you can also decrease the tuning a little bit to create a little bit darker sound. So with the very same sounds, and by playing around with the setting of the resonator and the topping white noise, you can turn the very same sound from a kick sound to a snare sound. It's very, very fun, and it's also a nice way to revitalize your collection of found sounds that you maybe used bazillions of ways. By processing them this way, you can create something new. And again, that's something that you can find in Cartago as well, especially in the drum kit. I have some kick and snare sounds. These all have been created with this technique. And by the way, with Cartago, and especially with the design drums kit, you can assign any of these sounds which fall under this kind of very design in dark industrial kind of sound. You can pick any of them and assign it to any pad. So there is a lot of versatility to customize your own drum kit. And if you don't want to do that, you have literally plenty of kits where you can choose from. I can't remember exactly the number, but it's plenty of drum kits with all these kind of sound processor sounds that you can use straight out of the box. Last but not least, this is a classic to create mostly kick sounds and low thumps. It's extreme pitch drop. Well, this is probably something that you're familiar with. The concept is very simple. If you take a long sustained sound with sufficient low end content, and you drop the pitch on a very high range, let's say 3 or 4 octaves, in a few milliseconds, what you obtain is basically kick sound. And I can show you this technique in the UVI Falcon, which is one of my favorite samplers. And I'm using a few samples from Dojo. For example, this one, analog distortion, you can find it here in the synth base folder. You know that in our libraries you can access the synth folder, and in most of the cases you can just grab the WAV sounds and use them even externally, like I'm doing right now. And yeah, this is the original sample. So this long distorted synth sound, it has some very nice low end, and I've loaded here. And then I've assigned the pitch to this multi-envelope where you can see the pitch drops at the highest possible range in Falcon, which is 48 semitones, and it drops to 0 in around 100 milliseconds, and the result is this one. At the beginning, but in the release, in the tail of the sound, you can hear the all the details that depend on the original samples that you used, and you can play around with different offsets of the sample, maybe decreasing a little bit the duration of this curve. For example, well, here I have the speed command, so I can, for example, set the decrease of the pitch a little bit high, a little bit faster. Well, let's decrease the release a little bit. Then, of course, if you have the sample transposed on the whole extension here, you have then to find the right note, let's say, where this effect, this kick effect, this thump effect is particularly emphasized. Well, let's try out also with a few other samples. For example, this one is a cello sample. I'll play it for you without the pitch dropping. Oops. Dojo, our synth library, and same thing here. You can obtain another interesting effect. Yeah, again, another kick sound, and maybe you can add a little bit more of presence by using a little bit of distortion. For example, this wave shaper in Falcon, which is amazing. Yeah, let's add also the. Well, I like to put a distortion after the reverb because it creates more texture, but we can try, to do the normal way, let's say, to put the reverb after other effects. Yeah, this is very cinematic, very sci-fi, so to speak. And yeah, let's try also other. Subtle, especially if the long sample is homogeneous, but it's always worth experimenting and find out to create new interesting impacts. And this one is another texture from Dojo. Let's turn off the wave shaper. Yeah, this is definitely darker. So this is a classic technique. I mean, you can do it in any synthesizer, in any sampler that has an envelope modulator. You can, experiment with drones, with synth tones, even with voices, and you always have a nice result when you transform it into an impact sound. And again, in Cartago, I have plenty of these sounds, which are mostly booms and kicks. Yeah, also let's try yeah, in the cinematic impacts category, yeah, this dark boom category. Raise the volume a little bit. Yeah, let's go to the mixer and let's raise it here. Yeah, very dark. But it's plenty of other sounds in this category of cinematic impacts in the design drums kit. Yeah, this one is great. Which, you know, come from either from one of these techniques alone or by a combination of different techniques. So, I hope that you have found this video interesting and inspiring. In this case, please don't forget to subscribe to the Silence and Other Sounds channel. I'll be posting more and more videos about creative sound design, so you're very welcome here. Thanks a lot.